Hello. Mic, check. What state?
It's my favorite. Sorry. I like when people touch my hair, but
Check the volume. Because we're gonna, or no, on the live stream.
what's the name of the website? Publicroom.biz. Yeah. Publicroom.biz. Do you want me to read your diary?
No, but you can read Amanda's.
Why?
You should.
It's very easy one.
Should do both.
Just make sure you turn both the mics on.
Oh yeah. Be careful of this. If it goes out during the talk, it's just
Maybe because you hit the button.
don't touch. Hello. Don't touch it. Well, yeah, if it goes out.
No, if it goes out, you know.
Oh, so if it goes out, retouch it.
That you're not.
Hi everybody. Can I have everybody move up front? Like why y'all sitting in the back? Let's come up front. Yay. Everybody. No. Good morning. Sit back. Good morning. How y'all doing? Good? Awesome. Thank you for being here. My name is Marquita Flowers. I'm the head of education and public programming at Gavin Brown's Enterprise. Welcome. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. Today we're going to do a really informal but like guided talk. One about themes that are prevalent in Shakedown, but also reading through this essay that you guys all have in front of you. This is not the full essay. It's excerpts chosen by Amanda and Leilah. If you want the full essay, you can go to our Instagram and download the PDF that way. I will quickly read through their bios. Give me 1 second. Leilah Weinraub is an artist and director living in New York as CEO and co-founder of Hood by Air, the subversive New York-based fashion collective known for its cult following. Weinraub helped to radicalize fashion by championing what she calls modern people, the rising class of consumers who subvert traditional markers of race, class, and gender, and revel in freedom, lawlessness, and spectacle. As a filmmaker, Weinraub has helped document such acknowledged tastemakers, particularly those belonging to queer, autonomous communities of color, whose creative output is often plundered by mass culture, but whose stories are really told on their own terms. For anyone who has not seen Shakedown yet, it is playing on the second floor of the gallery. The next screening will be at 4:30, and then we play it every day, Tuesday through Sunday, 12 to 6, right? Mandy Harris Williams is a theorist, multimedia conceptual artist, writer, educator, and internet and community academic. She is from New York and currently living in Los Angeles. In a nutshell, Mandy's work seeks to get everybody the love that they deserve. She graduated from Harvard. What? Okay. Having studied the history of the African diaspora as well as the mass incarceration crisis and other contemporary Black issues, she received her MA in urban education and worked as a classroom teacher for 7 years. She integrates a holistic didactic style into her current creative practice. Her creative work has been presented at Paula Cooper Gallery, Naval Gallery, Knockdown Center, and Women's Center for Creative Work, just to name a few. She has contributed writing work to Days Magazine, Mel Magazine, For Harriet and the Griot, and is a frequent radio and podcast guest. I highly recommend you follow her on Instagram. It is @IdealBlackFemale on IG. Thank you all for being here and enjoy.
Hi. Hi, Mandy.
Hi, Leilah. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay. So, thank you guys for coming today. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an idea of how this informal discussion will work, a little bit of an idea of how we came upon this format for this discussion, and then we'll proceed with the discussion. I feel like it sometimes lessens anxiety to know where we're going. I've seen Shakedown 3 times. I enjoy it a lot. I'm really curious about it and the thinking behind it. And Leilah and I began a discussion a couple weeks ago about some of the theoretical background for Shakedown. So I probed a little bit about that, and we'll get into what that theoretical framework is. And Leilah had, I don't want to preview the whole discussion. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give a few questions just about that theoretical background. Then we'll get into the text that you guys have on your chairs. And then we will get into some more general questions, and then you guys can talk back. Okay? So when we first started talking about the idea of Shakedown and maybe expanding it to include discussions around text, you brought up anarchy, which I was curious about, and exploring how the film might fit into discussions around anarchy. And I'm wondering, what are some of the ideas or intellectual impulses that drove you to make that connection initially?
Yeah.
Why is that connection important in the communities that you want to build around the film? And why is anarchy important in the way that you aspire for the film to be perceived?
So I always like to talk about where I came from before I started making the film, because it was kind of important and special and helped me have a foundation about thinking about things in general. So I'm from Los Angeles, but I went to I'm from Los Angeles, but I went to high school in Israel, And then I came back and lived in LA, and then I went to an anarchist university called Antioch. So my experience with anarchism and education is really practical. I think the idea or the lived experience of Antioch was feeling like institutions and structures are bulky and maybe inhumane, and the easiest way to counter that was to create your own reality, like world building. So the school that I went to, I guess even the first 2 weeks of being there is part of, you just learn about how to be young and at a place with other young people and how to deal with freedom. So the first 2 weeks were really about learning how to have consensual sex. It was very sex positive. They had something called the Sexual Offense Protection Policy, which teaches you how to negotiate verbal consent. They had groups called Third World Alliance and By Any Means Necessary. And they were just it was at the very beginning just totally different than anything I'd ever experienced before. The school was student run, and we could apply for money to go to different kind of conferences in Ohio and in New York and all across America that were about watching the police, about people's media, about organizing, about non-hierarchical group organizing, and how to talk in that kind of way. And so I had I really enjoyed, I learned a lot from that. I also worked with filmmakers there that were, I would call them part of communists, a lineage of communist filmmakers. So they made work about American labor. I worked with these two directors named Steve Bognar and Julia Reichart. They made movies like The Last Truck and A Lion in the House. Movies just really about American labor and how we identify with labor. And they were part of other groups called Cartumquin. Hoop Dreams was maybe loosely part of that group of films. So when I went back to LA, it was, I was not in high school anymore, not in school, and I think as living as an adult in Los Angeles is a really different experience than being in high school. You have to actually seek out your social group, and LA is a really segregated city to me. And in high school, you're integrated because there's busing, and outside of that, there's not. You just go back to wherever you came from. So I found Shakedown really randomly, just because I'm a person that goes out at night, and I just randomly somebody invited me, and I went and I asked to work there, and I was they were do you do anything that we need? And so I started to work there, and it just had in the process of working there and making the film, was just naturally some of the things that I was interested in Antioch were being played out, and I was oh, this is so cool. I can approach making this film, I guess, just from, it really wasn't about stripping or morality or nudity or sexuality. It was really about labor. And that's where I started.
I'm curious how long you were working there before you decided you wanted to make a film about Shakedown.
No, I knew it immediately. It was hi. It was so beautiful. The shows were so good. I had worked with a director already. His name's Tony Kaye, and he was he's kind of a dick, He's very showboat director, and when I worked for him, he was embroiled in the middle of a controversy with whatever studio produced his movie. So he was really into Hollywood games, and he kind of encouraged me to focus on the spectacle, and I thought that he was being an asshole. He was really focus on the spectacle, but then get to the truth behind the spectacle. So it was very beautiful and really easy to film there, and every night was different. It was really like intoxicating and dynamic performances. So it was very obvious that a film needed to be made about Shakedown. And people were, when you see Egypt, when you watch her walk into a room, you're like, that person is a legend and a star, and I can't believe that I get to interact with them. Obviously, a movie needs to be made about that person.
So as we thought about like how to present your like ideological background to an audience that had just seen the film, I don't think that we like necessarily wanted to find like direct correspondence between any text and the film, right? Like we didn't necessarily want to find like an anarchist text about an underground lesbian strip club, but
I think kind of the attempt was also to take text that is in the realm of like talking about anarchy or self-governance or like autonomy, and making that kind of democratizing that conversation and bringing it into like other things that are funner to talk about, which is maybe a collective erotic experience that we all just had together, like while watching the movie.
yeah,
If it was an erotic experience for you,
a show of nods.
and then you could tell me too.
So specifically, I'm curious, you just mentioned like this piece about group erotic experience, and I think when I watch Shakedown, like I feel, yes, I'm having an erotic experience, but also I'm feeling like a lot of Black love, and per the Black love, I'm feeling like a lot of Black liberation, and by the film being in spaces such as this, I'm feeling like a little bit of like a protest, like an artistic direct action, and I'm wondering how like in a conversation that might put, I guess, maybe a spectrum of like direct action as like either really respectable, like Martin Luther King, like.
Wait, can you just say that again? What do you mean by direct action? Like the film itself?
Yeah. I feel like by being in this space, it's somewhat protest-oriented. Anyways, so my question is, how does Shakedown, the party itself, and the film work to liberate Black women's bodies? Does the context matter? Is there an attempt towards liberation?
I mean, the question makes me almost want to faint a little bit. It's a lot, you know? Why don't you just repeat it, I guess.
So my question is, when you like screen in a place like Gavin Brown's Enterprise, what is your expectation for how maybe audiences might feel liberated, or is there like an expectation or a hope for how it might act as protest or as like a liberation tool?
I got to watch it on Saturday with like a group, last Sunday for the opening with a group, and I've watched the film maybe like 50 times, and when I watch it with a new audience, I kind of get to use the audience as a proxy and get to kind of feel it through the audience. It was really nice that time. There's something that happened during the moment with the police and Jasmine where I cried. I don't usually cry. I've seen it a lot. I think that like what I was trying to do is like release the film and finish it. It was a product. I mean, I worked on it for a lot of years, and it kind of needs to exist in the world, and it's separate from me now and needs to exist and do the work that it's supposed to do, and I'm still kind of figuring out what that is, you know, what it specifically means like to be here in this building as opposed to like a movie theater or a film festival. I'm not sure. I'm trying to like figure it out. The idea was that it's supposed to reach more people, and I hope that that's what happens, and that it reaches more people so that it can reach more people, and that people are able to see, I don't know, the feeling.
So I want to get into the text that we've provided. We've selected some passages. I've selected some passages that I thought, I kind of made connection with. And first, what I'll do is have you guys read through, or you know what, I will read aloud the first two passages. You guys can read along if you have the text in front of you. And then I'm going to ask you a question that's connected.
Okay.
Okay. So, basically, actually, I'll give a little context about where these quotes come from. So, this essay, Shades of Mississippi, the Nation of Islam's Prison Organizing, the Carceral State, and the Black Freedom Struggle by Garrett Felber, is actually a piece that was being featured in an anarchist reading group that takes place downtown called The Base, which it's in Brooklyn. And the essay investigates the history and the historiography, which is kind of an investigation of how the history is told, of Nation of Islam prison organizing specifically. It probes how specific aims such as the right to gather religiously or maintain a specific diet interact with an increasingly repressive prison state, and not, I guess, kind of how they work, not just one directionally, but how they kind of respond to each other as the prison state becomes more repressive, and then organizing has to respond, and then how they kind of go back and forth. Awesome. Thank you guys for the nodding. It helps me know that I'm being clear. So I'm going to read these two passages that kind of give an example or just a lens into largely what the essay is about. The first: the South was deployed not as a physical space, but as a set of power relations and oppressive practices with regional characteristics but national and global scope. The tactical use of analogies such as Shades of Mississippi by Northern activists reveals how these struggles were often in dialogue through tactics, aims, and rhetoric. And the following passage: because grassroots organizing by prisoners and the production of state knowledge and discipline grew alongside one another, historians of the carceral state cannot supply one-sided histories relying on state-produced narratives while burying the physical and theoretical labor of those who oppose such systems. Rather than seeing the development of mass incarceration and carceral apparatuses in the tectonic shifts of electoral realignment and other federal policy measures, this essay points to the local and daily exchanges between prisoners and prison officials as ground zero for the rise of the prisoners' rights movement and the extension of the carceral state. So when I read that, it really reminded me about, as I watch Shakedown, I'm kind of concerned. I have this, low-level anxiety the whole time about, white antagonism, which later, kind of materializes when the police come in. And I'm wondering if Shakedown as an event, as a gathering space, if you think that it can encapsulate more ideas than just Shakedown. So it talks about this tactical analogy of Shades of Mississippi as representing the South or a repressive South. Does Shakedown represent anything beyond Shakedown?
Yeah, I think it does. So I always think about, so if I think about my life and time, I started filming and working at Shakedown in 2002. The riots in Los Angeles were in 1992, so that was a decade before that. I was born in 1979. I think that my parents were married in 1969, which was also the year that Martin Luther King was assassinated. So I always think that that's, a decade. I understand what a decade is like in my own life now, and that it's actually a really short distance between those two things. And so you're still really working with whatever was that big event in the past. So in terms of the riots in Los Angeles, that was something that kind of before the riots, people were moving around LA a lot and being like, oh, this place is so fab, I'm going to see other neighborhoods, And the riots were another radically segregating event. And to me, what happened was that clubs like The Catch, which were pre the riot, were, people would go there. It wasn't like slumming it, but it was like, oh, we're going to go to the other side of town and go see people Vogue. We're going to bring my friend is Sharon Stone. I'm going to bring Sharon Stone to see Voguers, whatever. And then after the riots, people were very much more stayed, out of, did not go past Wilshire, I guess. Or I think of the 10 freeway as a dividing line in Los Angeles. So, I feel like Shakedown kind of grew out of that and is all black. And because of that, because people weren't and they had an opportunity to kind of be outside of a club circuit that was citywide. They were in a kind of underground totally black club circuit. And it just created a completely different show. There was another lesbian club called Michelle's Triple X. Jay-Z sings about it. It's called Peanuts. And so that was a totally different show. It was in Hollywood. It was on Santa Monica Boulevard. Celebrities went there. I think even in the black community, Shakedown was considered ghetto. People were really embarrassed about going there and being seen there and stuff like that. But it was extreme. But, and so there was a lot of politics involved in that. So ask me that question one more time.
So the question was basically about
is it more than the place? Yeah. So I think that it was an opportunity to see what can grow, when people are left alone. When a group of people are kind of left alone, and I had that experience myself. I kind of lived in a radical lesbian separatist community, and was able to just have experiences of what it's like to grow outside of comparisons that maybe are dogmatic, and I think that you talked about excellence or respectability politics, and I think that you mentioned Michelle Obama or something, respectability politics have to do with comparing yourself to the mass, I thought a lot about what is underground culture? Does that even exist? Do subcultures exist? If they exist, what's mainstream culture? How would we all experience mainstream culture together? Is that the history of, is it war? Is it is it Beyonce? Is it the news? How do you, I actually think that we exist only in subcultures. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Do you know what I'm saying about those separate things?
I'm thinking, I'm really trying to imagine now what Michelle's Triple X was like.
I never really went. It wasn't my thing. It was expensive. And you had to spend a lot of money. It just wasn't my thing, but it was a bottle service club where you have to buy a bottle and sit there with your friends and stuff, and that wasn't what I was into at that time.
Yeah. I guess the...
Wait, but I do love... I'm Michelle.
You love Michelle Obama.
All right, Michelle's Triple X and Michelle Obama. Right?
And bottle service. You love?
Now I've grown up a little bit more, so I can appreciate that.
So I wanted to come back to the Shades of Mississippi text. There are just a few passages that I made connections with.
Wait, is it okay if we don't skip yet? Because I feel like we didn't get to the core of what that was. Because you were talking more in what you wrote, which is about, like, if Shakedown stands for something else, you know, or another thing than what it literally is, which is a place where, like, it literally is a place where that Ronnie runs, the Egypt perform, you know. Like, you were talking about, I wanted to get more into this respectability thing, and I feel like, why did you want to bring that up?
Well, I guess I'm thinking about, like, the ability for work to change society, right? And how, like, a lot of how we see social movements is really dictated by, like, what's considered respectable. So I'm curious about, like, the ways I had asked Leilah, like, I'm curious about the ways that Shakedown liberates people in ways that, like, Michelle Obama could never liberate people, which is not to say that she's, like, unlovable or, like, not a liberatory force, but, like, how is it that even, like, a shared group erotic experience liberates us that's different than a movement that might be more, like, lawful, which I think gets into the idea of, like, the anarchy question, right? Like, so how can these spaces that are less lawful or lawless even, or certainly, like, law challenging, and I don't really know if I ever got clarity, like...
No, I think I know what you're talking about. Okay, so I would try to... I had a lot of ambivalence about releasing the film, kind of, you know, anytime before Barack Obama was president, I was just like, this film's not ready to come out because there wasn't enough content, like, in the world about black people, period, you know? And so everything that you made would have to be, the signifier would have to stand for, like, the total of the group, you know? And Egypt, I didn't want, like, Egypt or Jasmine or anyone at Shakedown to have to be, like, masticated and judged. And I also didn't want to have to represent them as, like, good or being good people. That, you know, Egypt is infamous, and she's, like, a legend, and she's, like, bad. You know, that's, like, her performance, and she should be allowed to do that. And there's, like, a lot of gangster movies, and, you know, and they're iconic also. But I think it's fine. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so there just needed a time to pass, and for, like, a lot more, even, like, banal representations of, like life and families to happen and exist and take up space, so that this could, like, be another example of how to live or how to be. And is that what you're talking about a little bit?
I don't have, like, one answer. I was just curious. I mean, I'm also curious about how Shakedown might liberate us in ways that, like, Beyonce is not able to. Specifically, like, one of the things I notice about Beyonce
is that she's, like, consistently excellent? Is that what it is? No, I feel like, I just feel like lesbian culture is more, like, consistently inconsistent, you know? Like, you never know what's going to happen.
Are you going to let me finish my point about Beyonce?
I couldn't tell if you're, like, one of those people that doesn't like her, and I was like, I wanted to stop that from...
I wasn't going to speak to that. I was going to speak to how, like, a lot of... I noticed that there's, like, very much a, like, physicality and, like, an unabashed sexuality about Beyonce, which is, like, also coupled with an emerging Black liberation, if not Black power, like aesthetic. I'm wondering how Shakedown liberates us in ways that Beyonce does not.
Is it weird that I want you to answer that question? I kind of feel like you would answer it in such a cool way.
Jeez. Okay. The real answer is that Leilah and I have thought about Beyonce so much. This was a trick question. It's not in our outline. And I would say, yeah, it gets back to that issue of like respectability. That like there's something that feels really. I know that you have a question about like whether underground really exists, but there is something that feels really like protected. And local about Shakedown, and that makes it liberatory to like be in the erotic experience when we're viewing it. That being said, and this leads to another big and deep question that I didn't prepare you for. I'm really curious about like, so once you introduce the dollar, we've talked about this, like once you introduce the valuation of women's bodies, even if it is by like other women, that there becomes some sort of hierarchy because, I mean, there's limited goods, right? There's limited money overall. One thing that like really freaks me out in the movie is when I think it's Jasmine who just gets off, and then there's a darker skinned woman. She goes, "Is there any more money for me?" And I'm wondering if you can speak to like, in the absence of like a strict hierarchy, are there other ones that arise? Were there other ones that you noticed? Is that just like my own sensitivity as a viewer?
There was money left for her. She's also a star. Her name is 360. Yeah. There are hierarchies inside of a strip club, even if it's a lesbian one, for sure. And it's all the things, you know? It's like color and size, and it all exists. Are you saying, like, are there problems in Utopia? Yeah, there are.
Well, with that, maybe we can get back to, did we cover the respectability issues?
Yeah.
And how are we doing with time?
We're good.
Okay. So the next 3 passages that you guys have on your sheet are like just pieces that kind of stood out to me, and I'll reframe this by saying like we did not aim to make direct connections, but like rather to think about how Shakedown as a film text like interacts with or might be held in a discussion with other anarchist texts, or like not even texts that are like necessarily anarchist and like how they're written, but just like that anarchist groups are looking to as examples or inspiration, or just like not even on a theoretical level, sometimes just on a practical level.
Yeah, like strategies.
So I'm going to read through these piece by piece, and then I'm going to just muse on how they made me think, and then I'm going to ask a question. And if you want to muse alongside, we can. Okay. So the first one reads, because Because the Muslim prisoners were not given a formal space to hold services within the prison, informal prayers, such as those described at Clinton Prison, often took place in the prison yard. Prisoners relied on memorized prayer, passing surahs to one another through oral tradition. I mean, I guess this one is kind of like directly made me think about the need for space, and specifically like the sort of surveillance that happens when we don't, or when people don't have their own space. And I guess I'll actually ask a question now, which is like, at the end of the film, Ronnie Ron talks about how they're looking for a permanent space, or like to buy a space. I'm wondering how like having to interact with landedness. First of all, I'm actually wondering like whatever happened with that, if you know how that developed, or what some of the difficulties of trying to make that happen were. And then I'd like to know, like, maybe, not that you can like predict a future or see an alternative reality where they do get a space, but like what are some of the challenges to keeping maybe that protectedness and that localness once there's an interaction with owning space?
Yeah, so Ronnie didn't own that space. The guy who did own it died, and it just turned into like a restaurant after that, or that's what it is now. There was like another club in Los Angeles called Jules Catch One, which was the longest running black gay club west of the Mississippi. She recently, a few years ago, sold it, and I think this week they renamed it her name, and it was named the Union. I think because she owned it, she was allowed to do whatever she wanted in that building in terms of programming, and she consistently programmed it as a black gay club. And I think that's what happens when you own your property. You can do whatever you want in that space. As a business owner, there's a lot of laws or governance that like guides and protects businesses. So I think that you are illegal. Businesses usually run illegal until you have enough money and make enough money to become legal and hire a lawyer and like a tax person and like a cop to stand outside and tell the cop to not tell other cops to come in. So I think that's also part of like owning a space and being able to like control the variables that have to do with like, I mean, there are underground clubs all over the place. It just depends on if you could like pay for, if you can pay for it or not. So Ronnie never owned, she never really bought property, and yeah, I think that's it's huge.
Do you think that in any way, like an interaction with having to buy land, like somehow, my first instinct, I'm sorry, that's leading. My first instinct was to like think that buying space would like somehow poison the purity of Shakedown, but I think the story of Jules Catch One seems to like say something different.
Yeah, there was also like this thing that was happening in film where if it was like a film and the subject was black, the arrival of that protagonist needed to be that they like escaped wherever they were from. Did you guys see Rise, that movie Rise? It was all about like, there's that really intense opening with gospel music. It's like Mahalia Jackson and riot footage. And it just like describes like South Central as just like burnt down, like this ash pile, this like gospel ash pile that like a genius few figured out dance, and like as a method to like escape the pile, they like are phoenixes from the ashes, and they can like do music videos in Hollywood, And sorry, didn't you think that was a good? So like, you know, I watched another movie that came out this year called Hail Country, Night and Day. I think that's exactly the title. Hail. Thank you guys. I'm so sorry. Can you please say it out loud for me? I'm sorry about that. And so when I was watching that movie, it was, you know, there was something interesting in there about building where you're at, you know, and like if you live in the country and you know in the South, that there's no like aspirational place that you need to go to, that you can build where you're at and make that good, you know. And so back to the idea of property ownership and just like building your own community. It's not really about leaving and going to some other place, you know. It's like, yeah.
All right, let's look at the next passage. Specifically, this reminds me, I'll just set it up and then I'll read it. Specifically, it reminds me of like how the way I experience the crackdown on Shakedown as a viewer is that like I see the suspicion is kind of like mounting, almost as though like Jasmine's arrest kind of triggers like a continual hyper surveillance until it's just like not functional or viable any longer, which I was reminded of when I read this passage. The stark contrast between the tolerance that Maggette described at Clinton Prison prior to Christmas Day 1959 and the various punishments levied against Muslim prisoners after it reveals the strategies developed by the state to suppress political agitation and the spread of Islam in New York prisons over the following decade. All of the sudden, the situation changed completely, he testified. Thereafter, we were in complete segregation, solitary confinement. The officer monitoring the congregation that day had reported hearing one of the prisoners say that the group was going to take over solitary confinement. He then issued a disciplinary report charging them with hosting an unauthorized meeting under the guise of an assembly for religious purposes. The prisoner who made the remark was locked up immediately, and the other men were soon taken to disciplinary court and moved to a minimum privilege area. Some even remained in solitary confinement until June of the following year. And then I'm going to read this next passage. One of the largest structural challenges to prison organizing was physical isolation from the outside world. Activists relied on what Berger has called a strategy of visibility to make their struggles known. Testifying has its political roots in slavery and has been carried forward through the Black feminist tradition. As Danielle McGuire points out in her work on the role of the struggle against sexual violence in the civil rights movement, testimony must be seen as a form of direct action and radical protest. Black prisoners saw the courts as political pulpits, a breach in the walls allowing them to take their claims before the world outside. As James Jacobs wrote, it is as if the courts had become a battlefield where prisoners and prison administrators, led by their respective legal champions, engage in mortal combat. Soster later wrote that the court is an arena. It is a battlefield, one of the best. We will use these same torture chambers, these same kangaroo courts to expose them.
Yeah. Did you get that Jasmine was charged with soliciting?
Yeah.
Which is a charge that it's a felony offense that you have to go to court for. You have to show up, and I think the charges were ultimately dropped. But there's another movie that came out this year called Crime and Punishment, which is about felony arrests in New York, in the Bronx, and how that's like a money-making system for the city of New York. Like every New York NYPD cop has to have, I think, 2 or 3 felony arrests per month. That doesn't mean felony charges. They don't have to actually, not felony convictions, it's arrests. So, like Mike Brown that would be a felony arrest. So they kind of like sweep through people because they have to meet those minimums. That just made me think of the passage that you read. Also, the experience with the police, they were just like, oh, we're just doing our jobs here. Like, they're like, it's not, this isn't necessarily bad. We're just kind of like sweeping through. So it's just like the machine kind of like working through block by block, sweeping things in.
They said that it's is it Horizon?
Yeah.
They said that Horizon doesn't have the type of permit needed for that type of performance.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, Leilah, have we spoken to all of the important points that you wanted to get through?
Well, I'm interested in this conversation. It's really like cool and open and not necessarily just about the fact of the film, but trying to like bring that into like, I don't know, like feelings about theory. And like it's interesting. I'm trying to see if we're going to point at anything in particular.
Shall we open it up to the audience?
Sure.
Do y'all have questions? They do not have to be necessarily related to the text. They can be related to the film.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious if any of the performers would perform in other venues in the city, and how, if so, that would affect the way that they were presenting themselves or how they felt about their performances at Shakedown.
They all performed at other places. They're like entertainers, so they're full-time entertainers. They perform at like straight clubs and gay clubs. I think Shakedown was a place that was fun, and you could make a lot of money in a really short amount of time. Other strip clubs, you have to work like 8-hour days. It's like a day job, and Shakedown, you could make like, I don't know, $2,000 in like 8 minutes, and it feels kind of good. And the crowd is cute. So, I don't know what what are you asking exactly?
We saw the way that they were talking about themselves in the context of performing at Shakedown, and how they viewed themselves, their identities. Oh, sure. And I was wondering, like, if you talk to them about how their perceived identity changes when they are performing in front of different audiences and different venues.
Yeah, I think that they didn't overly identify with they're performers, so they're like not going to identify with the place. Maybe that was something that I was doing. There are people, they're autonomous and like performers, so they're just like, I am what I am all the time, which is a legend, Hey, robot. Well, there's Instagram too. They're very like seen and active in LA, and like the scene. Mahogany is like around and still hosts parties and is like a legend, has a night. Egypt has a night too. Jasmine is like, I do not want to do that, but it's available for private parties if you'd like to know or meet her. And they all have like day jobs too that are interesting. They like all work in systems in some kind of way. Like Egypt works for, she works at like a homeless shelter, and Jasmine also works in healthcare. Do you have any specific questions about? Okay, yeah. So, yeah, no. I kind of just wanted the film to just be about what it is. I filmed for over a decade, and I thought that it was going to be this very large piece that was kind of transitionally about, like, Shakedown, and then after Shakedown, what happens, like, after this place is over. And it turned into a different story, which was just about these 3 years, But I ended up, I filmed with people. I stopped filming in 2014, so Yes, ma'am.
Hey, y'all.
It's being recorded. That's why they're doing the mics.
How has your relationship to the project just like either changed or evolved, or from when you started? If you've done this for over a decade, and you mentioned earlier how like you noticed even within a decade it could still feel like a short amount of time, or yeah, it doesn't, just like on a personal level, like seeing its run and like yeah, just kind of witnessing the different audiences that are consuming it, and like, do you feel more protective of it sometimes in certain spaces? Like, what is like, yeah, your relationship to it now?
I just always have been extremely protective of this project, and wanted to finish it with little support. There was always little institutional support. The only ways this film was funded was me, my friends, and I got one grant, a gay grant from San Francisco, Frameline. But so, yeah, I was like very protective of it. I wanted to make sure that it was never like content, that it was never, you know, I was never submitting a subculture to be like eaten up, and then so people can move on to the next subculture where they're like, oh, I know about lesbian strippers, and now I'm on to like, you know, like Thai car racing, you know, and it just needed to exist in a film space. I think that like once it exists as a film in that container, it's given me like the ability to detach from it and know that the film, it is itself, and it just has to like maneuver in the world however it can exist, and that I feel confident about like what happened on those nights, the way it was recorded, my original intentions, and the way that it came together. Like, I'm happy about what it is, and it can go without me now, you know, being like, who's watching it? Or like, you don't look at this. Like, you know, I can't manage that. Like, no one can, so. I'm excited for more and more people to see it, and kind of like unmediated. Hola.
Hey, in line with that, I'm just curious, you talk about accessibility to it, and I know a lot of people that deal with, you know, whether we call it art or media, or they deal with digital expression, and coming from spaces like this, it can be hard to have it be super accessible. Is there a way for people to see this virtually or outside of being here now, you know?
I think what I'm looking for is distribution that's legitimate, you know? So basically, you know, there's been lots of different ways to figure out how to get this film in the world, and I just kind of waited for things that seemed like people had an investment in the project. Like this gallery wanted to, like, you know, do a lot of, show the film, do things like this surrounding it, make sure that people know about it and it gets to a larger audience. So what I would be looking for is a distributor that treats this film like they treat other films and put actual dollars into marketing so that people can see it, you know. And otherwise, no, you can't see it any other way. What would you...
Hi.
Hi.
Is it shot in high 8, the whole film?
No, it's shot in SD.
Okay. It really looks like actual videotape.
It's not. It is videotape. It's SD videotape. Okay. So those are those small tapes.
Yeah.
But I shot on a. God, I forgot what it's called now. But it's a Canon. I think it was called a GL2.
Okay.
And it had SD interlaced footage. So it's not even like the frames aren't like singular frames. They're interlaced frames. That's why everything's kind of like soft. And it captures low light really nicely. It was like the highest prosumer camera that I could afford. It was like the nicest prosumer camera that I could like find and pay for at that time. And at that time it was probably around $4,000 for the full package.
Okay. Now, I think it's interesting that you continued to shoot in that format, like even after HD was available. I mean,
it was interesting in the way where people were like, "Do you know what HD is?" You know, they were like, have you heard of a Canon 4D? And I was like, yeah, I've heard of it. There was a while where the footage was, people couldn't understand. It was like not enough time had passed to have it be like iconic and represent the time. It was just considered bad footage.
I think it's incredibly beautiful, and I love the credits, and I love like all the like the scenes outside the club, you know, the freeways, and just the kind of neighborhood shots. But was it? Sorry, I'm just going to ask one more techie question. Was it easy to continue to edit in that format, like even after?
I actually have a computer at home that's just a Final Cut Pro. It's like a dead program. I basically am like editing at home with an old computer, a thing from the past that can do this film.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you.
What's up? There was obviously like a lot of really, really great footage in the film, but there were maybe about 2 or 3 parts that I could remember right now where the camera would kind of freeze at certain points, and you know, I just wanted to know from you, and I remember specifically that there was one point where there was somebody like throwing like some money in it, and it was kind of like a still shot of like somebody's hand and like a dollar bill. I wanted to know from you, what was it about the certain like still shots that you got that made you say, okay, like look, like I want to pick this out of all the rest of the imagery that you could have chosen? Was it anything specific, or was it just like super random, like, okay, like I like this shot? What am I asking? What am I asking?
I'm like, how did it make you feel when you saw that?
I mean, when I saw well, at first I was like, hold on, is it supposed to be like this? Or is there something wrong with the film? Honestly, at first.
Yeah.
But then, I think when I heard the audio, I was like, okay, and then the next scene came. But I don't know, I was like, I kind of would like this still to be like a poster or something, you know?
Oh, that's nice.
So.
No, I'm just joking. But, yeah. You know how it feels in LA? It's like a game. It's like a cop game. Cops have like really fancy equipment and like brand new Trans Am cop cars that just got off like the Warner lot. There's like always like a helicopter. That's just the sound of Los Angeles, is police helicopters and news helicopters with like very powerful spotlights and speakers, and it's just a part of the city. And I've said this before, but like growing up in LA, you get like cop ESP. You're like, oh, there's a cop that's like 3 blocks like left and up, you know, and you're like, oh, I'll go that way. And like it's at a certain point. Anyway, so in the film, there's always like the presence of the police, just like in life in Los Angeles. And you were just talking about it where things get glitchy, and that's just what it is. So I just want to bring it back to Mandy and make sure that we talked about everything you wanted to. I think we're close.
I guess I'll ask like a concluding question. You spoke a little bit about your experience at Antioch and like the response of like world building, and I'm wondering, with Shakedown being like a primary text, and then like carrying out from here, how do you see the rest of like the Shakedown universe being built from this moment forward?
I kind of think that's like about a a vibe that people experience like while watching the film. It's really like what I got to see in those nights was something extremely special, and it was like a different way to live and be, and kind of like a different way to be with other people too, a different way to like see other people. And I think that like with the film you get into that vibe, and that's a building tool. That's a way to build.
So does Shakedown live within all of the people who have seen it?
Mm-hmm.
On that note, thank you guys for coming to this conversation.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Leilah. Thank you, Gavin Brown's Enterprise. Thank you, Marquita. Thank you all.
Before everybody goes, I just want to make a few announcements about other things that Leilah has going on throughout the show. So on Sunday, September 30th, Leilah will be in conversation with, can I announce this? We could, with Venus X, and it's a partnership with Boiler Room TV. So please come back for that. And then on October 21st, which is also a Sunday, we'll be throwing a lovely ball party upstairs, so please come back for that also. Yeah, come cute, come real cute. And then Aya can explain. Yeah, come, Aya. Aya and Robot, do you want to come up and explain the ball? What's good?
This is work. So basically on the 21st, what's up live?
What's good?
So basically on October 21st, we're going to be doing an award show called Family Awards. And it's also going to be a ball, and it's all about community and unity. And we have categories like family that slays together, stays together. So come through with your crew, give a look. Correction, we also have a category called Who's That Pokemon? Come slay a look with your favorite pet. Right. So, you know, bring your snake, bring your dog, give a look, and just, you know, unity.
There's
family.
a category that's baby hair realness.
Yes.
Just come through with your shit laid down, please. There's also the award show is like, well, it's not really an award show, but we're going to be handing out awards, and there's going to be a survey that's going to go out too. So you guys, please sign our mailing list to find out like a ton of info just in general, but specifically for this stuff, you'll get all of that. So please do it.
We're giving out awards for best Instagram, best Finstagram,
best
messiest bitch of the year.
Flat tummy tea. Who sold the most flat tummy tea?
October 21st.
Thank you.
Because the last time you saw me, I was messy.